think there's anything wrong with saying that Palestinian nationalism is a reaction to Zionism.
And 47 the same. At every single opportunity, the Palestinians have turned down a state. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Hi, Joseph.
Hi. So, Noor? Yes. Yeah. So, I'm new. I've been in the country for 1 year. Tell me a little bit about you, who you are, where you live, and then we'll see how the conversation flows.
So my name is Noor Awad. I live in Bethlehem. I am a tour guide since 2014. I guide in the West Bank mostly because of the situation. I'm not allowed to guide groups in Jerusalem because that will require like a special permission from the Israeli army for me to go there. So I can't go to Jerusalem. I can't go to the airport in Tel Aviv or north or south. So because of this situation, I work mostly in the West Bank. I am part of Roots, which is a unique initiative here in the West Bank between Israelis and Palestinians. It's today over 10 years old. I joined in 2016. It was still a new thing. And the idea itself, which is Palestinians and Israelis living on the front lines of the conflict, talking to one another and realizing and opening their eyes to the situation and that this situation is bad for both sides in a way and must change and create a better future is something considered to be, especially in the West Bank, like unlikely to happen, or some people think it's impossible. But I found about this place, I found about this initiative, and I joined since 2016, and that opened the way for me to get to know people on the other side. I mean, Israelis, because until then, in all of my life experience in the West Bank, especially after the Second Intifada, the only Israelis I know were Israeli soldiers. Yeah. Never had the chance to meet with just people, like random people, average citizens maybe. And that's what I do. I'm still part of Roots. I'm still a tour guide. But since then, things are becoming more and more difficult on both levels.
And so I guess an interesting place for me to probe would be 2016. You obviously got involved wanting either to learn or wanting an outcome of some sort. 10 years have passed, a decade. A lot's happened, particularly in the last 2 years. It's gone crazy. Mm-hmm. What's changed for you from then? So why were you involved with Roots then versus why are you still involved now?
So when I found about Roots, and I hear the stories of the people who are behind this and the people who are involved in this, I was amazed because it was completely not the typical stories that I grew up with. You know, a Palestinian his brother was killed by the Israeli army, who spent years in jail, and he together founded with other bereaved families from the Israeli side this organization, the Bereaved Families Circle Forum, and they come together and they actually demand from the leadership on both sides to have a political agreement, to reach a political agreement that will secure a better future for both sides. And instead of vengeance and anger and the desire to revenge, those people they don't want the other people to suffer the same thing. That's not the typical story that I hear on my side. When I hear about people going to resistance, to join any Palestinian group and any form of like violent resistance, these kind of events in someone's life motivate them to actually go in certain direction. And here, that's what I mean by I heard about a different example. To also meet with Israeli families and Israeli individuals who actually believe in Palestinian rights, who believe in Palestinian national rights and Palestinian freedom, and they speak in favor of. That's not something that I used to hear before, and that's what I mean that I found a group of people who are trying to do something in this reality. And for me, this was inspiring because it's the first time I found another way of resistance, let's say, of the occupation that we live under, of this military regime in the West Bank, that is not violent, and that is thinking long term as well, and thinking about both sides. That's not the type of resistance that I grew up during the Second Intifada and after the Second Palestinian Intifada thinking about. It's kind of like I find it to be based on humanizing the other side. It's smart, it's also brave, because it requires you to get out of your comfort zone with your only narrative and the only truth that you know, and find a way to accept also the legitimacy of the truth of the other side. And that's why I felt inspired. And I joined. And you're right, things did not, since then, things did not on the large scale, it did not become any better. Things got much worse. And because of that new perspective that I gained as someone who you will call maybe a peace activist, I start to see how the political and the politicians and the political so-called leadership is actually not working to resolve this problem, but actually working on the problem, like basically benefiting from this situation, increasing more racism and hatred between both sides, and I grew more critical of the political leadership. And as someone on the grassroots, I felt motivated that we should build something on the ground. The solution for this conflict should come from the people, on the ground. And the last 2 years, the events that happened since October 7th and the war, it's just made it extra difficult, extremely difficult. And even on the organizational level, even on the personal level, the sense of safety, the sense of there is this what I can say that I'm occupied in the last 2 years with is the feeling of power, of helplessness, the powerless. Like what I'm talking about is far away from the reality outside. What do I mean how can I talk about peace and talk about coexistence and accept the other side legitimacy when there is still occupation, and it's even worse now? There is settlers attack, there is settlements expansion, there is like taking over the land, there is no hope for peace in terms of like that we will get our national rights as Palestinian people. So it feels very alienated, like the reality from what I was doing in the last couple of years in my life in this role.
So one of the things that's interesting for me in what you've said is, I guess you can divide peace activism into two camps. Or at least that's how I would view it. There's peace activism. There's me and you. We live in this land. Can we coexist? Can we live alongside each other? Can we get along? Can we have a coffee together? Can we talk religion? Can we talk football, sport? And that's just, can we coexist? And then there's the other side, which is more solutions focused and much more political, and which is there's an idea that you're working towards. And so listening to you, you're very much, from what you've described, you're motivated by the latter. You're motivated by how can I bring about a political reality that I want to see, which you described as an end to the occupation, a Palestinian, I'm assuming a Palestinian state. And I think that's the bit that's most interesting for me, because if you look at polling from Israel, with every war, support for the two-state solution gets lesser and lesser and lesser. And my question to you is, as someone who's living here, who was working towards something which is becoming less and less achievable, at least what you were working for, which is both sides working towards maybe the Oslo idea of a two-state solution. Has your thinking shifted at all as you've seen where Israeli society is heading, as you've seen what's happening here, as you've seen the actions of groups that maybe you do or you don't disagree with, but like Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Al-Aqsa, all of these groups that did wage October the 7th and did create the catalyst that lit the spark which has created the war which has engulfed everybody in this region. Has your thinking changed at all?
So you are right. My motivation on doing this is based on a political vision, on creating a different political reality, because it comes basically from the realizing, and that's what I was talking about just like a few minutes before, understanding the reality where I am. Like me and you are sitting here, right? Where are we sitting? We are sitting in a Palestinian land, in Area C, in a room that is built according to the Israeli army illegally on a Palestinian land. We cannot obtain a permission. There is no way for us to obtain a permission, so the army can come and demolish this anytime. We don't have really power here. We have electricity, but that's through solar panel, and that's a solution, but it's not what it should be. And we are not connected to water. We bring water trucks to. So we are here in the West Bank. We are not citizens of the state of Israel. You are. I am not. I live under Israeli military regime and the Palestinian Authority. And the Palestinian Authority that's supposed to become a state, who never became a state, cannot provide me with any protection. So there is so many examples, and there is the reality itself. Me and you, we are not on the same ground. If we were inside Israel, maybe that would change the situation because I will be an Israeli citizen, and it might be it will be a different situation because there is also the question of identity. But put that on side, the question of individual rights and collective rights, that's in the heart of it. That's in the heart of it. And when I came here 8 or 9 years ago, if Rabbi Hanan, who I met, who was one of the founders of Roots, if he did not acknowledge, like he basically realized there's occupation, but if he did not acknowledge that we should have a partnership that is based on realizing and opening our eyes to the reality, to the political reality, because the politics here also influence the social and the economic reality, and we need to work to change it. I mean, the rest of his story, okay, this is a nice person, but he's still a settler. He lives here at my expense, and by mean at my expense, that every settler here basically actively, when they live in the West Bank, and they build settlements and they build outposts like that, the one just recently was built here behind our center, is taking more and more land and attacking any possibility for a two-state solution for a Palestinian state. So the fact that the people here, we build this partnership on the desire to change the reality and a desire to find a solution. Now, I'm not saying that the only solution out there is a two-state solution. There are many ways to think about solution, to be creative, but the basic thing is to recognize that there are two people here, the Jewish people and the Palestinian people. Are they both people? For me, yes. Do they have national rights on this land? Yes, to me. Both of them have connection to the land. That's a yes for me. And both of them have the right of self-determination. That's a yes. Now, Palestinian violence have been always part of this conflict. It did not start yesterday. It did not start on October 7th. I can say that maybe it made my job harder as someone who works in grassroots and hoping to create the change from within. The October 7th, the war made it harder. But the events that preceded October 7th, before that and after, is also not less. I mean, the 2 years before, I remember myself, I still remember very like how I'm struggling between the reality outside. I am worried every time I leave Roots. I might be stopped at a checkpoint, something might happen, I don't know. I didn't feel like a sense of security or more security before. Unfortunately, I think I have also to understand, and this is something that I think I understood better now, which is to separate between my view as someone who's a peace activist, my perspective, and the real world outside as well. Because at the end of the day, there is a certain bubble that is created here by doing this work. And it affects both of us, Israelis and Palestinians. So there are, now I don't want to get deep into the analysis of like what happened October 7th and how that, but like we reached to a point in where the Israeli society basically is not thinking about like the Palestinian issue or making peace with Palestinians is not a top priority for the Israelis. And even when the right-wing government that was elected in 2023 in January, you could see that the members and the parties who are making this coalition are now even talking more, and that was even before October 7th, about like annexation of the West Bank or parts of the West Bank, the next move that they should include Judea and Samaria, all of these kind of things. Like it's also already made my job as a Palestinian much harder, and it's very difficult for me. The moment I joined Roots, 2016, to go out to my community and to say, I'm not just sitting with Israelis, not just any Israelis, but also with Israeli settlers. Why? Because my society understands that Israeli settlers are part of the problem here. And it's hard for me to explain how. I mean, I'm not just talking about someone who's like a peace activist, the head of a peace organization in Tel Aviv, but like settlers in the West Bank. It made it even much more harder. These kind of actions and things from the Israeli side, and also the violence on the Palestinian side. And I know this is a long answer, but I'll say, naturally, when you become a peace activist and you realize that this violence is a cycle and we just like continue to hate one another and dehumanize each other, you want to break off this cycle. And at the same time, I had to find some balance. But like but the international law says we are a people under occupation. We have the right and legitimacy to fight for it. But at the same time, I understand that this violence is not bringing us any closer to our goal in a way. It only generates more hatred. It only generates more dehumanization. So I felt kind of stuck between those two things. But I think I found a balance in where, as a peace activist, I think I have to break this cycle of violence, not to support it, and to find, that's why I described the first time when I learned about roots as a non-violent way of resistance. But there is also a problem here because the other side is also practicing violence in many ways, and they are legitimizing it. The army here is saying the occupation is for security. That's legitimate. But we still live under occupation. 57 years live under the occupation. So it's really hard to live with all of these things at the same time.
I think one of the things that I find interesting listening to what you describe, it's very difficult for me to. So I'll give you an example. I'm trying to work out, because the focus is what it's like to live under occupation. And one of the things I think that honesty and transparency is the best way to have any conversation, even if it can be a little offensive or it can just be completely wrong. But one of the things that blows my mind is when I drive down this road and in this car park is the socio-economic picture isn't what I'm told on the internet. So I'll give you an example. If you go into this car park here, you look at the worst car in there, the 10-year-old Peugeot 2008, that's my car, that's all I can afford. And then I look at all the cars with the Palestinian plates and they're all brand new Kias. I got overtook by a Maybach the other day, $250,000 Maybach with Palestinian plates, overtook by BMW M5s, Range Rovers, a lot of them from Bethlehem. And so what do you mean by, so there's the national aspirations of the Palestinian people, I get that. But then when it comes to the hardships of occupation, for you, as you described as occupation, what are those hardships?
That's a very good question. I'll add to what you just said. I think if there was no occupation in the West Bank, and if we were really to be a true independent sovereign state, we would be even richer than what we are right now. We'd be richer, seriously. I mean, think about it. I have a Palestinian Authority passport, right? Almost every country in the world, I need to go, I have to apply for a visa, and like the Palestinian passport is like one of the worst doing passports in the world. It's not really a real country, even though majority of the international community recognizes the state of Palestine. But for example, if we have a Palestinian state in where East Jerusalem is our capital, and that many nations who want to visit Jerusalem, they would require to obtain a visa from the state of Palestine, then they will deal with us the same. Then definitely my passport will be much more powerful, because there are so many tourists from different countries who want to come to Jerusalem, who want to come to Bethlehem, who want to come to Nablus and see those places, see part of the Holy Land. That's just for example from the occupation state, but that's I also feel talking about this is like talking up there on a very high level. Now, it's true. At the same time, when you hear about the internet, about the occupation, I think it's oversimplified. I think people tend to make it like very black and white. It's either very, very bad or very good to them, and that's how people make it. It's not that. It's more complex on the ground. It's more different. It's like you see there is a Palestinian, for example, a Palestinian who spent the last 15 years of his life working hard, making money, working whether in the settlements or in Israel, getting paid more than what they get paid, of course, in the West Bank, but still have to pay over 2,000 shekels for a permission in the black market to get a permission to work in Israel, because there is that kind of like black market thing about the permission that it even existed. And then he built this nice house on his land, but it happens that this land is partially Area B and partially Area C. And then the army decided to demolish that house, 3 floors or whatever, like very nice house, spent many years to build it. And you say like, why did you do this? Why you don't go build in Area A? But people feel like in Area A, we become more, the real estate prices are going up high, and it's becoming more dense. So there's so many things that the occupation is taking away from us. I don't deny that after the 1967, for sure, there was this economic boom in the West Bank. And many people actually left their land because most of the community before 1967 was made of agriculture, farmers. There's hundreds of villages in the West Bank. And people were shifted to move into labor in Israel. Some even worked hard on themselves, despite that the situation is not also easy, and they got actually well-paid jobs, higher jobs. Doctors in hospitals inside Israel, some of them even from the West Bank, they will become like the head of the laboratory of Jerusalem, for example, like a medical lab. There's few people occupied like really high positions, but most of the people in the West Bank, they do the low jobs, the low paid jobs, yet still they made money with that. But then what happened? In the 1980s, you have Ariel Sharon, who became the agriculture minister, and he basically went back and he used a law from the Ottoman time that says when a farmer leaves his land for over 5 years, I think it becomes a state land. And that's how he legitimized stealing more lands from the West Bank from farmers by doing this. So I think everything comes with the expense. When I see that G-Class or like Range Rover, on one hand, yeah, I am happy that this person is doing well, but I know there's expense, there's a price to it, unfortunately.
So for you, that price is you're improving your material condition at the expense of your Palestinian national ambition. Yeah.
Not just the national ambition. Sometimes it's proving someone's life, an individual, at the expense of the collective.
Yeah.
That's what it's also is bad. There is a very common belief in the Palestinian society. If you go ask anyone, if someone all of a sudden show like a wealth, like, buy a new car or buy a house, most people will immediately jump to say, he sold land to the settlers. Yeah. He sold land to the settlers, because where would you get all of that money from suddenly, unless you did something like this? You sold land to the settler or property to settler.
That point, because that's a really interesting point which you touched on earlier. So you mentioned that the property building in Area A is becoming increasingly difficult because the prices are soaring, because Keynesian economics, the labour costs go up, the living conditions go up, and everybody's investing in this area where you can build. You then got Area B, Area C, and so if a Palestinian sells his property to an Israeli, and the Israeli launches a legal or an illegal outpost, depending whether they get state permission to build there, but it's their land. For you, they've purchased that. For you, what's the difference there between the Palestinian that's building illegally and the Israeli that's building illegally?
The different thing is that I can go into Israel and build there, whether legally or illegally.
Yeah.
I can't. There is no way, there is no legal. There was in 2019, I heard about this, there was this rumor, I wasn't sure about it, but there is like a wealthy Palestinian family in Hebron who they have a factory, they run some businesses, and they tried to find a way, because they have wealth, and they tried to find a way to purchase a warehouse, a large warehouse in Jaffa. Now they can't do it themselves, so they had to register it on someone's name with an Israeli citizenship, whether an Arab citizen, Palestinian citizen of Israel, or Jewish. So that's nearly impossible. Like, to do something like this, I can't go myself, and as I told you, I can't go and build inside Israel. So it goes back to this idea when I was a kid, and I first heard about Oslo, and the people older than me, they explained to me Oslo. And I know like the history before that. My grandparents had to leave Malha, and we lost 1948. We call it 1948, beyond the Green Line. That became the state of Israel. And then they say, okay, now we have negotiations for 2 states, and we are negotiating in the West Bank. And my immediate reaction, as simple as a kid, I was like, why we are negotiating? But we took the 22% in the Oslo agreement, and they took 78% of the entire land, and we still have to negotiate for the 22%. So I felt like even the little we have as Palestinians, we still have to negotiate to get some of it, and not all of it, what we deserve.
And so for me, what do you deserve? What do you believe the Palestinian people, because you talk a lot about coexistence and both people belonging on the land, but you then also at the same time talk about Malcha, which is a neighborhood in the south of Jerusalem, as your family coming from there. Do you think you or the Palestinians have a right to all of the land, but you settle for less in the name of peace?
Yes. Yeah, so I think that we have definitely a connection, and a strong connection, without even like start to give descriptions to that connection. We have a connection to the entire land. We once and for a long time lived on the entire land. Our identity evolved on this land. And despite or in spite what happened in 1948, we still, some of us are able to practice that connection. And we still have communities who are, with everything happened. And I think when it comes to us as a nation, prioritizing the idea of having independence and not have to live under the mercy of the Jordanians or the Syrians or the Israelis or wherever in the world, and to live as refugees, to have our own state, then we have to find a way to make a compromise. The problem is, in the real world, when two parties are negotiating and one party has the power, the other party doesn't have the power, that compromise will never be in the favor, or it will not be just to the side who doesn't have the power.
This is where I kind of disagree, because I think Israel has been incredibly compromising. And you're right, Israel holds most of the cards. They've got one of the most powerful militaries in the world. Economically, it's strong. It's a cohesive society. It's going to be very difficult for the Palestinians to militarily uproot the state of Israel, close to impossible. So Israel is holding all of the cards. Yet, despite that, you have something like Olmert, where he offered Abbas in 2008. He offered him most of the West Bank with some border adjustments. I don't know how that would have left this particular place right, because we're in Gush Etzion, and Gush Etzion would have been one of the places that would have been swapped for Palestinian, that's for Israeli land, and it would have been part of the Israeli state. So it was most of the West Bank. East Jerusalem is the capital. The old city in the Holy Basin under the custodianship of the Jordanians, the Israelis, the Palestinians, the Saudis, and the Americans, to protect the holy spaces and the rights for everyone to pray there. So basically, they were offered absolutely everything, and Abbas said no. And so that's an example of where I think Israel has offered genuine opportunities for the Palestinians to have a state, and the Palestinians basically is, and you'll have a different take of the history, but if you start in 1937 with the Peel Commission, the Palestinians or the Arabs were offered over 90% of the land, and they said no. And 1947 the same. Every single opportunity, the Palestinians have turned down a state. And so I guess throwing that back to you, dude, like when I look at that, I want you to convince me that I'm wrong. When I have a conversation and I meet someone who has different lived experiences with a deep knowledge and a deep personal knowledge and personal experience of this conflict, I like to be proven wrong. But from my perspective, the reason why there isn't a Palestinian state isn't because of Israeli settlers. It isn't because of Israeli unwillingness. It's because the Palestinians or the Arabs at every opportunity have turned down that state. Would you say I'm wrong? Do you have a different take?
If you are saying it every time, I'll say you are wrong. If you say there are some times, I'll say I'll agree with you. And here's the thing. So I also wouldn't want to argue against like the military uprising against the Israeli, because, to be honest, so what Hamas did in the Al-Aqsa flood in Gaza Strip and everything that happened, if it was a different country, if it's not Israel, and if it's not packed and supported by the US government and by the Western countries, I think it will be a different story. I don't think that the war would last until now. I think that state would have come to a political agreement. I mean, that state, meaning the state that will be instead of Israel. But we are stuck in a very unique situation. One image came after October 7, made me realize that the occupation we live under here is an American one. I mean, literally an American one. They said one of these cargo planes coming from the US, like sending military aid to Israel, they opened the door, the rear door of the cargo plane, and I expected to see, some shipment of weapons, of artillery, of ammunition. And then what came out of that cargo plane was the military jeeps that the Israeli army uses, but not in Gaza. They use it in the West Bank, because there's no way they would drive these jeeps in Gaza with the rockets and the type of fighting, the nature of the fighting that's going on there. And I was like, Israel is a sovereign state, and it's a wealthy nation. It's not a poor country. And yet they still get those military jeeps in the West Bank that they drive from the US. Can they manufacture these jeeps on their own? I mean, it doesn't require, Jordan do them. And I realized at that moment, as, I don't know, absurd, funny, how it sounds to you, that like, if the US is sending these jeeps that the Israeli army using in the West Bank, that's like a very symbolic thing, what I'm saying, but like, just like realize without that American support and immunity and protection, which is nothing, I think nothing like it happened in history, the occupation would not have lasted until now. So this is something important for me to understand and to say about this reality. And this is something I deeply believe in today. If there's a decision in the States, and a powerful decision, a strong decision, a clear decision that this occupation should end and there should be some sort of a political settlement, I think it will happen tomorrow. Even if Israel will not like it, even if it was pressured on Israel, Israel will. That's in the real world politics. Now, to answer your question about the question was about like the history and Palestinians turning away every chance. You are right. Pre-1948, we weren't thinking that we will settle just for part of the land. I mean, why? We understood that the British basically played us, or they fooled us. They fooled the entire Arab Revolution, 1916. They promised Sharif Hussein that he will get all of the land and the Arab revolts. And the people in Palestine, I will say, they will not all necessarily supporting the Arab revolt. Some of them, I think the majority in Palestine, 1910s and 1920s, they were against the Ottoman Empire itself, but not necessarily the Arab rule of the land and the Muslim caliphate. There were different voices. I can give you examples. There are some of the pioneers of Palestinian leadership who wanted something similar to the nation state in Europe, and they were very like inspired by what happened in France and later. And they said, let's be the people of the Levant because we have so much in common. Basically, Syria, Greater Syria, and Palestine. And we are different also from the Bedouins. Let's have our own kind of like a state or empire because we have so much in common culturally and like language, terms of language. And then there was one stream of Palestinian nationalism that's more traditional. That's not those the sons of the wealthy people who traveled to Europe and saw what happened there, but also the ones who are here and who suffered from the persecution of the Ottomans and said, you know, the Turks should not be the ones who lead the Muslim Caliph, but it should be from the Arab people. And when we come to the 1920s and 1930s, we began to understand that the dream of having a Muslim Arab-led caliphate is maybe too big to achieve right now. And that's where the Palestinian leadership start to awake, you know, or start to understand also the uniqueness of the situation in Palestine. Of course, at those years, Zionist movement emerged in this conflict, and that even increased the fear and the concern among Palestinian leadership. So by the time we get to 1937, we are fighting British colonialism. That's how we understand British colonialism. And we're fighting one branch of it, which is Zionism, which is motivated by the colonialism. That's how Palestinians understood. The Palestinians were not like, what's Jewish identity? Jewish is like a Muslim, like a Christian, like you are like a religion, people of faith. But why these people from Europe, you know, with Herzl and others like coming and now saying that they want to take this land was really impossible for the Palestinian national movement to digest and accept. Now after, that's the battery. It will go off. Maybe I should wait it.
Should we just wait it out then?
I don't know what happened when it goes off. I'm joking. خلاص. Yeah. So I think, and also you are in 1948. I think what happened was also a big chaos, because by big chaos I mean almost like in 2 years period of time, you have 65% of the population all of a sudden, you know, becoming refugees. They lost their home, they lost their villages, and their top one, like the top one demand wasn't now for creating a state, whatever that state will be called. I was like, I want to get back to my home, to my property, my land. 50% of the prisoners in Jordan prisons in that decade, 1950 till 1960, 50% of the people who were imprisoned were Palestinians who preached the ceasefire line in order to go back to look up, to see their fields and to their homes, their properties. My grandfather did not go back to his house until after 1967, when there was again the ability to travel to Jerusalem and West Jerusalem to see his house. And then he found a family living there. And it's known that most of the people who settled in Malha were Iraqi Jews. And because they were Iraqis, so they speak Arabic as their mother tongue, and they sat there, they had a conversation, so that wasn't the priority in those years. The priority wasn't to create a Palestinian state now. The priority was to deal with this catastrophe. And also there's something that with high sensitivity to say, which is that we fall not under one occupation, 1948. I think many Palestinians just tend to think about the catastrophe that happened and the land we lose and the villages and the cities and the homes, but also tend to forget that we also fall under other two occupations, which is the Jordanian and the Egyptian occupation. And why I call the Jordanian occupation? Because it is Jordan by force. Jordan wasn't here protecting the West Bank. Jordan by force annexed the West Bank. It made it part of the Hashemite kingdom. They made us citizens of Jordan, and we had voting rights, at least better conditions than the Israeli occupation now. Some of the Palestinian leadership fought against that Jordanian movement with the famous assassination of the Jordanian king, you know that. But Jordan, yes, occupied us for the next 19 years after that, and that even made it harder. And I was just explaining before to the young lady who asked me, it's like originally in 1964, we were not supposed to create something called the PLO. Usually in this situation, you either create a government in exile in diaspora, like when your country is occupied. It happened, like France was occupied by the Nazis, by the Germans, and they had their government in exile that was in London, that was in the UK. So we could not have created that government because that government used to be in Gaza, 1956, and then Jamal Abdel Nasser shut it down because he wanted the pan-Arab national dream that came at our expense. Because one extra state that is against the idea of unifying everyone. So why do we need a Palestinian state? No, we are one pan-Arab national identity. And then you have the monarch in Jordan who basically wants Al-Aqsa for also personal reasons. He wants the control over Al-Aqsa and the holy sites in Jerusalem. And he killed the dream for Palestinians to have a state. So I think if we were really left alone in 1967 somehow, I think we would have created that state in the West Bank and Gaza.
So this is the thing for me is, obviously there's a huge amount of history you've covered.
Yeah. And I'm sorry that I'm giving you long answers.
And I agree with 50% of it. And you started by describing it as an American occupation. And one of the interesting things, and said if the Americans weren't involved, then peace would have been achieved a long time ago. I actually take the counter view, and I actually think that it's the other way around. The only reason this conflict persists is because of Islam. Mm-hmm. So you've got Masjid al-Aqsa, and you've got the entire Ummah. And for as long as Al-Yahud have basically control over Masjid al-Aqsa, that's a thorn in the side of many Muslims in the world. And so a lot of my work is devoted to coexistence between Jews and Muslims along religious grounds. La ilaha illallah, we believe they're very, very similar things. And I think, for instance, if you go back to 1948, the Americans were nowhere to be seen. Your family's from Malcha. The battles around Malcha, Mechor Chaim, Katamon, these were raging between first civilians and civilians. The early Jewish militias had like one rifle. In 1948, at the beginning of the war, there was one rifle that was shared between every 3 soldiers. I like reading diaries from that period. And so I was reading the diary of someone who was living in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, or that sort of area. And he's describing just the incredible military position that the Arabs had, the Arab Legion, which was I'm telling you something, you know all of this, but maybe people that are watching our conversations don't. The Arab Legion was armed by the British. It was manned by British officers. Glubb, who set up and actually invented the kafir, the Palestinian national symbol, and the flag was Sykes, another British man. No, exactly. But this is the conversation that's more fun now. And so it was manned by the British. It was armed by the British. The Egyptians had tanks. They had aircraft. And in the early stages of the war, the Zionists had nothing. America was nowhere. Yet miraculously, the Zionists won the 48 war and were able to retain a state. And so...
And you believe it's a miracle and it's like it happened, just like a miracle.
I'm careful with language of describing things as miracles because there are logical reasons as to why the Zionists also won that war, despite the huge odds stacked against us, to do with the inability of the Arabs to coordinate, each having their own vested interests, stopping at certain points of the war once they retained the territory, like the West Bank, which they wanted. And also the Israelis, during the course of the war, were able to procure some weapons. They were able to buy a few old Spitfires. And so you can explain away the miracles, but I do actually think it's a miracle that the Jews were able to establish or re-establish our state here. But that wasn't even where I was going. Yeah. And so just because you covered so much things, so you described it as British colonialism, then maybe American colonialism, but you know the history probably better than I do. And so I'm reading an amazing diary at the moment by a guy called Meinerzagen, who was he was the chief political officer of British Mandatory Palestine. He was the guy that recommended Herbert Samuel come and replace the war officers in controlling what was then the colonial British Mandatory Palestine. He was a Zionist. He was a Jew, Herbert Samuel. And it's fascinating listening to him describe, because he's describing the huge opposition he faced, because he's a Christian Zionist, the huge opposition he faced from the British, from all of the administration here were completely anti-Zionist. They hated the Jews. They saw them as socialists. And so the British basically the British and the Jews were at war with each other by the 40s in this land, because the British basically locked the doors of mandatory Palestine to Jews and allowed Arabs to continue to move in large numbers. And I think that's the other thing you touched on, which it becomes very interesting from my perspective, is you talk about the deep roots of the Palestinians and the evolution of the Palestinian national identity in this land. And for me, I see it very differently. And this is where, again, I'll throw it back to you to show me how I'm wrong. But I see Palestinian national identity as a reaction to Zionism. I don't believe there was a Palestinian national consciousness prior to, at the very earliest, you could say the 20s under Haji Min al-Husseini and the Arab High Committee, where they started seeing the Jews who'd always lived in the land. Your family's been here for centuries. So for centuries, they had Jewish neighbors in this land.
The Jews never left.
Exactly.
They always
stayed here. What they lost was sovereignty, and at times they lost the ability to live where your family lived, which was Jerusalem. But they never left the land. In 1844, Jews were the majority population by then of Jerusalem. Most people, according to Caesar Famine and various consulates, most people don't know any of this history. They just assume Jerusalem was Muslim, Christian, and then many years ago Jewish. But that wasn't the case. Your family would have had Jewish neighbors in Jerusalem without a doubt. And so I see Palestinian national identity as a reaction to Zionism. I don't think it would have existed if it weren't for Jews coming. And originally, and that's the other side of it, you see it as the Palestinians losing land. From the Jewish perspective, when you read the Balfour Declaration, when you look at what happened in the collapse of the Ottoman Empire after World War I, the Jews are expecting all of this land. They're not, and when all of this land, I mean all the way into Transjordan. Yeah. And the first thing, and this is the interesting, like hearing you talking about the Jordanians, is you have the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. Well, the Hashemites aren't from Jordan. They have nothing to do with Jordan, and they got 78% of British mandatory Palestine. Yeah. And they didn't call it Palestine, they called it Jordan.
Transjordan. So here's the thing. Let's start with the first statement. The conflict is because of Islam. I think, and I believe that I can say the same thing about Judaism, that the conflict is because of Judaism. I mean, if Judaism did not exist, if there's no such thing, then Zionism doesn't mean really any sense, except just like a bunch of European colonizers who go for another land, and they will take this land for its resources. Typical like colonialism, but Zionism is motivated by Judaism.
Would you agree that Judaism kept the national aspiration of the Jews alive, or would you say that we don't see ourselves, I know you spoke to more Jews than you probably had hot dinners, but we don't see ourselves as a religion, we see ourselves as the people that lived here. Yeah. And so are you, just to understand what you're saying, are you saying that it's the religion that kept that dream alive, or that claim is based on the religion rather than on the history?
I think if I say that the conflict is because of Judaism, I think it's also oversimplifying the identity on the other side, meaning the Zionist Israeli Jewish identity. And you kind of like pointed to what I'm going to say, because it's much more complicated than that. It's much more complex than that. And I think there's a theological discussion and debate even within Judaism itself about what is Judaism from the temple era and after the destruction of the temple and after like the exile, and there's a religious theological discussion inside Judaism. That's another different story. So I think it's a component. Religion is a component of an identity here that you cannot forget about and you cannot take away, but you cannot say at the same time it's only because of religion we have the conflict. Like, imagine if all of Palestine was actually Christians, then we will not have conflict between Jewish Zionists and Palestinian Christians. No, we will have some of the pioneers of Palestinian nationalism were Christians, and still, and Christians are a small minority today. So no, I think that it's a component. It's one element of the identity. It's a strong, and because in our history here, maybe unlike Europe, there was never really a time where you separate religion from state or religion from the people and the rule. It's hard to exactly think like what happened in Europe and like to create this Palestinian secular national identity. Now, there are voices like this. I'm one of the people who I define myself as a secular. I'm not religious. Yeah. Yet at the same time, I mean, being at roots here, I also learned again how religion is important and it's part of this conflict. I also agree that sometimes it makes things more complicated because very often the people who are into religion, and I will say in my society, the traditional, they are more closed and they have more barriers to deal with the other. Because I come from kind of this secular, humanistic understanding and identity, and I'm open to everyone. I don't have agreement with your faith. I don't think that there's anything wrong with your faith, but I do have a problem with your politics, with your decisions. That's but it's harder for people who are more religious and traditional, who see the truth with their religion, with their faith, and how they really.
And I think that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying by it is Islam, and it's also Christianity. I think the huge support you see from America isn't because of Jewish influence. It's because there's a huge Christian population there that supports Israel, and it's a vote deciding ticket for many of those Christians. I think with Muslims, there's 2 billion Muslims in the world, and this is the third holiest site to them, and it's highly politicized, and it's tied into end times prophecies, and so. That's why I'm saying, I think if you removed religion and you put our people in Uganda, let's use a controversial talking point, if the Palestinians and the Israelis were fighting over land in Uganda, I think they would have arrived at a solution decades ago, right at the beginning, because it wouldn't have had such huge pressure from the outside world.
Yeah. And the other thing you said that I also want to talk about, which is important, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that Palestinian nationalism is a reaction to Zionism. But I don't think it's the only thing. I think there's an evolvement that happened, and I think that Zionism at some point boosted like this process of evolvement of Palestinian national identity. I think that there was some national conscious before 1920, not because I want it to be or I just like it to be, but I mean, if you go to when Herzl, for example, went to the Sultan Abdul Hamid al-Thani, and he actually suggested, so the Sultan refused. One is out of like the religious kind of like, oh no, this is the Holy Land, this is all like we fought for this and centuries, and like, you know, we liberated Jerusalem should always be under, but also there is like the idea of the local people who are living there who will not accept such thing. They will not accept to just like one day, one night sell their land where they were born and live for generations and have their lives and their dreams and their connection just for some money and leave. That's why in the 1930s, 1920s, the large land sale was from the Arab landowners who owned in Palestine, but they were not Palestinians, they were Lebanese who actually sold the land for. It was much fewer from the Palestinians who sold their land, and when the Palestinians realized that this is part of a political project, that selling the land will actually affect us in the future, not just affect me, my family, but the whole people, then that awareness increased. By the
Palestinians didn't own most of the land. That's the whole point. It was the Lebanese.
Yeah, and then that was in the Galilee. Yeah. That was in the Galilee in the north. And then you have also to dive deep into the Ottoman policy, because again, the Ottomans, unlike what Muslims and sometimes Palestinian Muslims like to think that the Ottoman Empire was a Muslim empire and we lived a good life, and we only lost because we lost our power, because we turned against the Ottomans, we betrayed them, and then we fall into the hands of the Western power, the Western colonization that also produced to us Zionism and then the state of Israel on our land. And until we go back to that caliphate, to that mindset of the caliphate and the Ummah, we cannot. That thought exists in my community. I don't agree with it. I don't. There are Hamas in the beginning of it was mostly thinking this way. It also kind of changed now, 30 years after. But this Islamist also view of the history I think it's also part of what I also reject or what I stand against within Zionism as well, which is like we want to revive something that is hundreds or thousands of years old and apply it to the situation now without learning the lessons that we as humanity, not just Israelis and Palestinians, went through in the two world wars, in everything that happened, in the control of the church in Europe, the monarchs, the idea of a nation state, the revolution. We want to forget everything and we want to go to this kind of a dream of we had once a Muslim caliphate that was powerful. It's true. It's true that if we were united as 50 countries or 50, I don't know how many they are, but like we will be powerful. It's like the European Union now. But I am not, that's not my issue right now. My issue is not, I'm not in this place to say, you know, we have already a state of Palestine, we are a nation, we are recognized, we have our seat within other nations, United Nations or wherever, and now let's think about what kind of unity we want, whether with the Gulf states or with the Arab countries. I think that's not realistic, even though it's happening, and there's a big motivation with it. Like, I mean, on both sides, Israelis who want to restore Jewish sovereignty from 2,000 years ago, and Muslims who want to restore Muslim sovereignty. Listen, I many times say here, and this is a thought that maybe I'll say it as I say it always. Like, if Israel in 1967 annexed the West Bank and made it part of Israel, I think that the conflict would be much less violent than it is right now. And I think a kind of a new identity would have evolved in the last 5 decades, where, yes, people will still talk about the history and the different narratives we have and disagree, but it would not be as violent because the current reality that we are living before the Palestinian Authority, I mean, when I hear stories about before the Palestinian Authority, how people used to live, I didn't live this time. I wasn't in the first Intifada. Sometimes people describe, you know what? Sometimes when I was young, I was envious of the people of Jerusalem, of East Jerusalem, because they had the Jerusalem idea and they can go everywhere. And today, if you give me the chance to live in Jerusalem, in the old city or around it, with all of the policies that happens, I'm not envying them. In Bethlehem, it's much more peaceful. I don't want to deal with the border police every day and with their racism and with their practices and everything. And I just can't just like deal with all of this. So why I'm saying this? I'm saying that what's happened is also as a result of the choices of the government and the political level, and things could have been much better. Like you said, like today, those people are driving nice cars because there was a decision on the political level to make, not to shut things completely down, but to make some sort of life. They made room for life, and it happened. And there is nothing bad about that, and there is nothing that we should be ashamed of. But we have to think about a long-term solution. Now, I think that the conflict has to do partially with problems within the Israeli identity and the Palestinian identity. So, for example, I think when the Israeli identities say, or Israeli voices say that we want the entire land, but we also want a Jewish state, there is a problem here because it's not facing the reality on the ground. You are not facing the reality. Or you want to go to kind of solutions that they are like inhumane and barbaric and not, you want to pretend that the Palestinians don't exist in order to take all of the land. I think, and I'm saying Israel because Israel here is the powerful side, it has to decide what it wants from this land and the people on this land. You can't just take the land and imagine, no one is living on the land other than me. No, there are other people living on the land. So you have to make a decision about that.
Yeah, no, and one of the things, I've been here just over a year now, and I've gone from being two-state solution guy to not having a clue what I want the ultimate solution to be. I know that I want there to be a Jewish state, but I also have a whole moral framework of which any solution I subscribe to, I can't compromise that. And so one of the issues I face is like exactly as you described, that the material conditions of Palestinians in Area A and Area B and Area C are better than they've ever been, as far as I can tell. But then you describe there's all other factors in which limit your life, which limit the lives of those that are living here. And I think one of the things that I'm starting to realize with the more conversations I have with people like yourself is that I don't think you have peace activists here, in the sense that you have everybody on either side is ideologically motivated, and most people have a solution. So if I speak to some of the more right-wing settlers, they will tell me that they're fine for the Arabs to live here, provided they're loyal to the state and they don't have citizenship. So that's already an issue, because if you don't have citizenship and you just have residency, you are de facto a second-class citizen, and there's millions of people living here. That's a moral question that anyone who argues, and the counter-argument to that is, well, they've turned down the state at every single opportunity and they've waged war, but I'm speaking to you and you're not a man of war. You're not telling me that you want to wage war against me or my family. You're telling me you want to coexist, but you want a very different political reality.
When I coexist in right conditions,
Yes.
in a conditions that will be good for both sides. I think what Israelis have already is good for them. They have a state. It's now been there for 7 decades. It's doing well, and I think that the Palestinians, we should have the same opportunity. I think that, like every people, we of course have decisions and made mistakes, and some other Palestinians might, by the way, disagree with me. Might say, if we got our own state, it might be a failure state. Why? Because we can see already like the challenges that will be put in front of this state. This was actually a debate during the British Mandate time, when basically the British Mandate was introducing itself as it's here basically because it wants to improve the infrastructure for the people and create like opportunities and create businesses. And some of the Palestinian voices of the leadership say, but like at the end of the day, what they are taking from us is way more precious than what they are giving us. We're living under colonization. We are not free people, and I think that even if we will be a failure state, and I don't think, listen, I'm not a politician, but like I think it's in the favor of Israel to make a Palestinian state and to make sure that it's a successful state.
Because this is going back to what we were saying before, that Israel has made those offers. And so let's say you've not got Abu Mazen. There's a future leader, Barghouti, whoever it may well be. Would you as an individual, would you be okay with a state in Area A and B, Area A, B and C, Area A, B, C, and Jerusalem, Area A, B, C, and Israel? Like, what for you is the minimum viable product? What is the minimum state that you'd be?
So here, listen, I am not the expert to decide what is a viable state, but I'll tell you something. So yesterday, after the leaks that came out that Trump might recognize a Palestinian state, you see kind of how like the Israeli government is like stressing and panicking, and like Netanyahu yesterday went out and he basically said several things on a press conference, and one of it he said like, Israel will always control the land between the river and the sea, including the Gaza Strip, and will always have security control over the entire area. It's kind of it's not a new statement, but it's also like, I'm trying to read into the statement. Like, he didn't, according to the Arabic translation I heard, he didn't say sovereignty. It's different. Security control and sovereignty are two different things, I think. Because I don't think he wanted to be, I think he wanted to have I don't think he wants to reject already before he's sure that Trump is not going to do something like this, because I don't think that that Netanyahu, if Trump somehow took such a decision, that Netanyahu is willing to actually stand up against the Trump or something like that. At the same time, you have the Israeli Knesset, who voted several times now that we will not recognize a Palestinian state, and the actions on the ground every day that is done intentionally to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. And now they are talking about a new road that will connect only Palestinian areas and separate between settlers. So all of what's happening on the ground is not leading to a viable and a normal reality for both sides to live in, for both sides, not just for like, not only for, mostly, of course, the Palestinians are paying the high price of it, the highest price, but like for both sides, this is like,
But I guess what we're getting to, I hear that, but you said your family's from Malta.
Yeah.
Malta's 100%
Yeah.
in Israel, like what maybe others would call Israel proper.
according to who?
Yeah, this is
So Malta is 100% in Israel according to the UN, according to the international law.
This is
If
my
we
point.
accept that this is the base, then East Jerusalem, the entire city, the entire of the old city, Bethlehem, Gush Etzion, is 100% in Palestine.
So that, and this is what I'm trying to get to. So when because you are coming, your object is a Palestinian state. That's why you're here. That's why you're talking to me. You believe that us having this dialogue, I've got a large audience. Heads Up have a large audience. We're having this conversation because we're trying to influence. We're trying to bring about our political vision. And so what I'm trying to understand from you, and it's the thing which is, you clearly came into this conversation and the conversations you've had for over a decade now with that objective. I want to help my people achieve national liberation.
Yes. Thinking
What's the
also
minimum-
about the future of the other people.
Yeah, well, I completely agree, which is why you're in a coexistence, peaceful space rather than many of the forums you could have taken. And so I guess what I'm trying to ask really directly and bluntly is, what is the minimum that you would accept? So like, have you given up on Malcha? Have you given up on Gush Etzion? Have you given up on Area B? Have you given up on Area A? Like, what's the minimum?
So okay, so this is a good question, because here is actually there is an initiative that is also kind of like the same old as Roots almost was created at the same time. We love maybe in Roots to talk about, because it kind of like reconcile two things that they seem contradicting. One is that the ability to live on the entire land between the river and the sea, and at the same time to secure for each side their right of self-determination. And that is an initiative called Land for All, or their old name was Two States, One Homeland, and I like the old name. But they are basically, they say, yes, we have two states, we need two states, but we can't just stop at two states, because it could be that the relationship or the ties between those two states will develop badly. It could be that this is actually, the two-state solution is also not naturally compatible with the identity of people of both sides. Because even if for like practical, pragmatic reasons, I would say I'll give away Malha, and I have a state here in Bethlehem in Palestine, but I will also tell my children that we are originally from Malha, that will always be where we are from. So what to do with that? What to do with it? They propose, I think, a fascinating idea, which is to have two states, that they are both have a confederation, similar to the EU, where both countries have soft borders, open borders. They can go from one side to other. They can live in either side regardless of their citizenship, meaning that you can stay here, live as an Israeli citizen in the state of Palestine. You vote in Israeli elections. You vote here in local Palestinian elections, municipality or whatever, and you can live your entire life here. You have that right, because the two states, the two countries are in one confederation. Beside, they proposed like a solution for the security, the borders. Not everyone has, I don't think that there is the perfect solution. But this idea of two states living on confederation became my dream after I joined Roots. Like before I joined Roots, I wanted two-state solution based on what the international law and the international legitimacy give us. The international legitimacy gave Israel what Israel is today. They gave them their country. They gave the Jewish people. And now we still don't have our right of self-determination. But after I joined Roots and I started to think about both people, both sides, I was like, wow. I stopped with myself and I imagined. Of course, there are things that can go bad, things that can go bad, but I started to dream of such a reality where there is two countries and there's borders are open between us, and can travel in this land, and we work together, we collaborate together. We don't have to hate each other. We can live together, and we can have kind of a new education that basically teaches both sides' identities and their connection to the land. And we can have even a wider, because being a tour guide, studying about Christian and Jewish history in the land as well, I think that was part of the process that helped me to come here and to understand better, because all of a sudden, I'm not just like entrenched in the narrow Palestinian Muslim narrative of the land, but I can also see beyond that. And I remember at the end of my tour guiding program, I was like, this should be in the schools. Like, we should take this in the schools. Like, in the schools, everyone should like learn about the history and the three religions of the land, wider than the national narrative that we created from, 1920s, 1930s until now. It creates much more respectful connection to the land, and more respect between the people and understanding. I still can't get my head around when, for example, Palestinians don't understand why, for example, Christians are celebrating this holiday. What does it mean for them? Why on a certain day in Bethlehem they close the roads and they do this and they do that? Or vice versa, or also like Palestinian Christians who don't know, or about also the Jews. So yeah, I'm kind of like giving you a lot of things to think about, but at the end, I think that's for example an idea for a solution that should happen, that could happen, and that can create a lot of like potentials for the people here to thrive on many levels. But what it requires now, where to start from, that's what we might maybe disagree on, I don't know. But like, we have Israel, it's a state already. We as Palestinians, we are not a state. We have the Palestinian Authority, and we have the lifts of the 30 years of the Oslo process with all of its problems. And we have Hamas, and we have, until we are given this equal ground that we are a state, and then we have also, not just any state, I want it to be a democratic state where people can really say what they want, and people can vote for their leadership. And then with the help of others, I don't think that we can make a solution on our own. I think with the help of other nations from outside, we can turn this place into something much better than it is right now.
So one of my biggest, I'd love to push back, but I don't think it's going to be helpful for the conversation, is just look to all those failed confederations. You look at Lebanon, and then you look at the hatred between Jews, not me and you, but Jews and Palestinians on this land and you then throw in religion. Making that work is going to be incredibly difficult.
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned several elements. One of them was education. I intentionally mentioned education because it's in the heart of it. Someone might say we can start with this now. I think in a way what we are doing in Roots, we are kind of doing that. We are starting with it right now, but it needs, I mean, there's a different, like, maybe also we will disagree on this, me and you. There's a different, like, politics is shifting, and like the US is no longer maybe the only superpower in the world, and it's not controlling everything. And also they are realizing that, and the interests of these like world powers are changing. If you go to the most of the world, if you go like China, Russia, all of these states recognize the state of Palestine, and they recognize, I don't like the word of the only solution, but they say this is like the solution because there's two people in this land. Whatever their narrative is, whatever who believe he has the truth, he has the historical, both sides each side should get their state with of course with an agreement and on certain borders usually, which is the Green Line 1967. And I think that's the basic step. And from there, then we can develop our relationship. The only thing that is standing in front of this, or not the only thing, but the major thing that's standing, is that Israel has the power now. And if I was in the place of Israel, I also will ask myself, why? Why would I give the Palestinians this? Unless if I have to. It's unfortunate that that's how we as human beings, we function. Unless if I have to. If I don't have to, I'll try to not go into there. Because I understand it requires like hard concessions on both sides. It requires to have like a leader, not just a politician in Israel, to make such a decision. And now if that didn't happen, well, we are just, I mean, next time, maybe we'll try to meet here. This place will not exist in the current reality that we are in now.
So two more questions. First question is a quick one. You can just be a very quick answer. There's 500,000 Jews, Israeli citizens live here today. Mm-hmm. In your future state, what happens to those? Do they become Palestinian? Do they?
I think that people should be offered with the options. Yeah. Either if it's important really for them to stay here in this land, and it doesn't matter which like passport and under which government and country they live in, which is I don't know. I don't think that this is like what the majority feel, but like I think they should be given the option to be Palestinian citizens with equal rights. And I think when Rabbi Fruman was one of the spiritual leaders of like Roots, was before Roots established, he did like really a smart move when he went to speak to Yasser Arafat and to Ahmed Yassin. People might think it's crazy. There's some contradiction in some of his actions. I get it. I understand why, but also it's very kind of smart and out of the box thinking what he did. I think, yeah, people should be given this option. And the other option on the table should be also like a limited like land swaps, annexation of the land that does not affect the country geographical contiguity and the viability of the state. As long as it doesn't affect that, it's fine. Then which area stays with who, that's fine. And a third option also, that people should be given the option if they want to move back to Israel with compensation from their government. I think the Israeli government is in charge and responsible for this situation. And part of its responsibility is to relocate Israeli citizens who don't want to live in a future state of Palestine and want to stay in the Jewish state. I think that the Israeli government should bear responsibility for the full process of it.
So my final question, and you wouldn't know it, but I run the Israel Advocacy Movement, and I should be pushing back much more, but I wanted to learn from you more than I wanted to debate you, because I think the most powerful thing we can do is actually listen to what the other side is saying, and really deeply think about what's been presented. And so my closing point, so as I say, I run something called the Israel Advocacy Movement. I have over 350,000 followers, 100 million people watched my videos last year. So I have a very large platform. And my question to you would be, how can I best use that platform to bring about peace?
As a Palestinian, I always look outside and I want the people to be more pro-Palestine because I feel that will give us the leverage to deal with the situation. Yet at the same time, I understand that the more people out there, they are just like pro-Palestine, on the short term, yes, it might give us some power and leverage. On the long term, it's just like fueling the conflict in a way much more. It's like adding more fuel to the fire, adding more oil to it, investing in the conflict. Because there's nothing wrong with being pro-Israel or pro-Palestine as long as you are also realistic and you understand that this is not a football game. This is not a football match. Like one side will win and the other side will lose. And no, this is people's lives. This is like it's also like it might sound weird what I'm going to say to Palestinians and pro-Palestinians. It's also about the future of, even if Israel has the power and Israelis have the power, it's also about their future. Their future is also I mean, one time I had a debate with Ali here about like the right of self-determination, where I said our right of self-determination is separate from the Israeli one. And he pushed back by saying no, that the right of self-determination of both sides is connecting. No one can have right of self-determination. We, the Palestinians, we cannot have right of self-determination without the Israeli Jews having right of self-determination. And without us making sure that they should have also, they have it already, but like
you throw all the Jews into the sea, and then you get
that's but that's the realism that I'm talking about. Palestinians are not going to just give up and leave their land and their homes. Israelis are not going to give up and leave their lands and their homes. People outside must understand that, and they must choose. Okay, I want to be pro-Israel because I think that the Israeli government is like facing a unique situation. They are facing all of this hostility, whatever, blah blah blah. But yes, at the end of that, I also need to understand that it's part of being pro-Israel that I also be pro-Palestinian rights as well, and that Israelis and Palestinians find a peaceful way to live together here. And the same thing applies for Palestinians, which is, I know that is very hard to say because you have to go through a certain experience to get that, it's a personal experience to get. I understand how people can be extreme outside, sometimes maybe more than here, sometimes more than the people here, and also unrealistic in what they propose as a solution.
I also think the extreme outside fuels the extreme here. And I spoke about Islam, but it's much more than Islam. So if you look at any pro-Palestinian organization in the UK, in America, what map do they have as Palestine? What do they say? From the river to the sea. And so when you sell the dream to the Palestinians, say someone living in Gaza City, that actually the entire world is with you from the river to the sea, you will get back 48 land, as it would be described. That sets a belief that, well, maybe this will come. But then you go to Tel Aviv and you look around and you see these huge cities with millions of people, and just, it's not going anywhere. And so by selling this false dream and fueling the conflict, you actually just inflame things further. You're not putting out fires, you're setting fires, and you're setting both of our people up for failure.
I agree with you.
Come back to me, my platform, large platform. What can I do? What's the one message you would like to see Jewish, hardcore Zionist influencers who are reaching large numbers of Jews, non-Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus around the world? What would you like to see those that are on the enemy side, the Zionist side? What would you like to see them
There's
say?
many things. I can tell you already one thing. I don't know if you will do it or you, but like
We'll see
something
what it is.
to suggest. Maybe you already did it. I don't know, but it will be completely unexpected and unique if you yourself mention in your platform that Palestinian people have connection to the entire land, as we, the Jewish people.
I've said that many times.
So that's,
I say some Palestinians go back, ancient, some descend from Jews, some descend from Christians, some from pagans, others came more recently. But just like the Jews, many Jews flooded many Arabs. But 100%, anyone who watches my content knows that I say that the Arabs living here, there were Arabs living here before we established the state, and there were Arabs living here after we established the state. So,
and I think that one of also the other things is that if you want to influence and people outside, is that, I mean, I'm already kind of expecting some of the things that you say on your platform. I'm sure that you said all of this already, but that Palestinians are also required to give an answer. Like kind of I give an answer right now also to the Jewish connection to this land, to the Jewish people. what we are willing to accept, what we are willing to give the other side. Because as I want the other side to recognize my connection, I also recognize the other side connection. That's also important. The pro-Palestinian need to. Now it's very common in the Palestinian and pro-Palestinian side to still till this day, whether intentionally or not, because that's how we get it, which is to differentiate between Zionism and Judaism, and just to say two separate things. And yes, there is Jewish history in this land that we say we appreciate, but it depends on who you are talking to, who you are asking,
And who are the real Jews?
and who the real Jews is. Exactly. So that should be on the table out there. In the pro-Palestinian, I assume not a lot of pro-Palestinian will actually watch you. But
I get a lot watching, but it's usually rage watching. They're watching to get angry.
yeah.
I'll show you some of my content
So I
afterwards.
think that's a kind of a good. I mean, the first time when I heard Hanan speaking here, and like he was like, he's just like calling himself a Zionist, yet at the same time recognizing that the entire land is Palestine. I was like, I couldn't run away from this. I couldn't run away from him. If he just stopped at being Zionist, it would be easier for me to just like, to just. But like when he said that, it was so powerful. The first, I never expected someone to say something like this, and to not just to say it, to believe in it and to live with it, as he claimed every day that he lives with this. It made me change myself. And as much as I can be angry on the other side, and I still believe what I said, like that this occupation is being supported by the American government. Yet at the same time, that doesn't, in my head, take away the legitimacy that there is Jewish people, there is Jewish history of this land. I can't even disagree with how the Zionist movement did, what they did with the history, what they did, how they interpreted it. I can still do that in my mind, but yet still there is Jewish connection. There's a real, genuine Jewish connection to this land. And this might sound to an Israeli or a Jew like normal, but for a Palestinian to say that from his or her heart is it requires a lot. Requires a lot. And yeah.
I usually say Jazakallah khairan, but you're secular. So say Jazakallah khairan.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Noor.
Thank you.